The system has produced too much currency, money and currency out of thin air, and the economy hasn't kept up. And that's the only reason why people are hard up. That's why there's a cost of living crisis. And of course, they will blame other people as well. They will blame greedy corporations. They will blame Putin. They will blame the weather. They even blame now climate change. Monday, August 12th, 2024, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. We're going to look at inflation today, mainly because this week we've got these statistics that unfortunately are called inflation by 99.9% of the people, even people who should know better, I would say. But I'm not going to have a go at anyone. I'm just going to try to explain what inflation really is and why the CPI data that we're going to get tomorrow for the US and the UK on Wednesday are not really the inflation. And I'm going to show you as well how the powers that be, the central bankers, they blame everything and everyone but themselves for the inflation. Before we start, just wanted to give a shout out to Dirtyman Safe. I don't have to really say much about what's going on, especially here in the UK, in regards to law and order. So if you're trying to keep your valuables safe in these turbulent times, check out Dirtyman Safe. It's a great way to hide not just your gold and silver, but maybe even your crypto hard wallet if you're into that, and other valuable things. There's a link below in the description for the Dirtyman Safe. You get 10% off if you use my link, and you also get a gift from Dirtyman Safe if you do order one. And they'll ship to Europe as well, not just the US. I'm going to start with a quote by someone who knew very well what inflation was. And this person was Felix Somary. And he was an advisor to all the major governments in the interwar years and post-World War era. He advised the US Treasury. And this is what he said about inflation. The state alone is responsible for inflation. Inflation without government, or indeed against government, is impossible. So when you hear Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, and all the rest of the politicians saying they're going to bring down inflation, if they don't talk about reining in government deficit spending, if they don't talk about abolishing the central bank in order to stop the central bank mechanism of creating currency out of thin air, if they don't say any of those things, they're not serious about reining in inflation. And I'm going to do a very simple exercise here first, a simple example, and then we're going to look at what's happened in the UK in the last 10 years and why prices are rising. And then we're going to look at some misleading comments, in my opinion, by one of the people who are in the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England about what she calls inflation. So in the old days, and that's why the definition of words is so important. In the old days, inflation in the monetary sphere, and by old days I mean about 100 years ago, or even less, maybe 56 years ago, and prior to that, inflation referred to the inflation of the currency or money supply. And how did you do that in a fiat currency system? Well, you did it through deficit spending. You did it through the central bank creating reserves out of thin air to buy government bonds. And when they do that, they send the reserves to the Treasury, and then the Treasury can go into the economy and spend that currency, and it becomes currency created out of thin air. That's what inflation is, the inflation of the currency or money supply. And it does result in rising prices of some or many items. It might not result in rising prices of some items or services. It all depends on what the supply of those goods and services are. But generally speaking, in a fiat currency system, especially the one that we've had since 1971, when the gold window was closed by President Nixon, and the world's gone mad in terms of increasing the currency supply or the money supply. There's no attachment to gold or silver for that matter anymore. Gold and silver, of course, are, and well, they were and still are money. You can argue all you want, but they're still money. Why do central banks keep buying gold to put it in their reserves? The banknotes we have, or dollar bills, they were just promissory notes for money, for gold or silver. So I'm gonna explain it really easily for you what inflation is. So I'm gonna start with an economy that has only one apple. That's all the economy is, one apple, right? And the money supply is 10 pounds. So this apple is going to cost 10 pounds. Very, very simple. Well, what if for some reason the money supply, let's say the central bank, increases or doubles the money supply to 20? Well, that's going to double the price of the apple from 10 pounds to 20 pounds. Of course, that's a very simplistic analogy, but I'm going to show you why prices, or the currency really, that's the other thing. Inflation of the currency is the debasement of the currency. It's the simple law of supply and demand. The statistics that we get, called CPI, Consumer Price Index, or even the Producer Price Index, or the PCE that the Fed looks at, they're just calculations of what prices have done relative to the currency over a period of time. And the government statisticians, they're always tweaking these prices to make it look lower. They do it through substitution, through hedonics. What's substitution? Well, instead of having fillet steak in the basket, they put Spam. What about hedonics? Well, they say that all the gadgets that they've put into cars make the cars more, the quality of the cars is better. So a car that costs $50,000 today is really the equivalent of costing $20,000 30 years ago. But what if your salary hasn't gone up as much in percentage terms? What if you're driving a Tesla, which I've seen, I've gone in one a couple of times. A friend has one, and I have to say, it's a very plain car. I don't see any improvements there. So that's the hedonics. They do the same thing for computers. Even though your Apple Mac might have gone up, doubled in the last 10 years, they say it's much better. So the price is actually what it was 10 years ago. And that's how they do it. And that's how they try to keep this CPI down as much as possible. And they also come out with this crazy notion that the currency has, or that prices really, because not the currency, prices have to go up 2% a year. Why can't prices stay, general prices that is, of course, why can't they stay flat? So the more you produce and the more productive you become, the more you can get, the more prosperous you become. And I think they do that because in the fiat currency Ponzi scheme, they need to keep inflating the system, inflating the currency, because the currency is debt. And if you stop inflating, the whole system implodes. But now to the real world, not just the economy that has one apple, to a real world example, and I'm going to use the UK, and we're going to go back to 2014. So I'm going to show you here the UK GDP in US dollars, because the US dollar is still the major reserve currency, and a lot of the stuff we have to buy from abroad, a lot of the imports are still priced in dollars. So in 2014, UK GDP was just over $3 trillion. So we go now to the latest data, and this is 2022. It might have gone up a little bit, but we're at just over 3 trillion. So over those 8 years, GDP basically was static in the UK. So there's just one apple. That's the way you have to think of it. Maybe it increased a little bit, and it might have increased a bit more recently, but it's still basically an apple. Think of this as the UK economy. So what are we going to look at now? Well, we're going to look at M3, money supply, which includes notes in circulation, coins in circulations, bank deposits, and short-term gilts, which are very liquid. Basically, the money supply. So we're going to go to 2014. Let's go to the beginning of, well, let's go to the end of 2014. So, yeah, GDP, money supply was 2.358 trillion pounds. And in 2022, you can see here, money supply topped at 3.7 trillion pounds. So it went up more than 50% while the economy didn't move. Yes, it's come down now, but it's still at 3.5 trillion, while back in 2014, as I said earlier, we were around below 2.4 trillion. So the money supply is growing. The economy remains the same in terms of production. Well, it's the simple law of supply and demand. Things will generally cost more because there's less supply of real things and services and more supply of currency or money. So now I'm going to quickly show you this headline that I saw this morning from the Financial Times, or FT. It says, UK wage growth still a concern for inflation, warns Bank of England rate setter. Catherine Mann says pay pressure in the economy could take years to dissipate. So I'm not going to read through this, but this is the kind of stuff that we see, brainwashing, I would say, that we see. They imply here that wages and people demanding higher wages is what causes inflation, but it isn't. We've seen that in the last 10 years, the UK money supply is gone up by 50%, while the economy has gone sideways, and that's why the currency has been debased. We've produced, or the Bank of England and the government, through deficit spending and QE, money printing, the system has produced too much currency, money and currency out of thin air, and the economy hasn't kept up. And that's the only reason why people are hard up. That's why there's a cost of living crisis. And of course, they will blame other people as well. They will blame greedy corporations. They will blame Putin. They will blame the weather. They even blame now climate change. And what's the consequence of all this? Well, the consequence of this is that people's wages and salaries, they don't keep up. And I remember growing up in Brazil in the 70s and early 80s, mid 80s, there was massive inflation of the currency. Prices were always going up. And we were told back then that it was because of the OPEC embargoes in the 70s that led to higher oil prices. But that was rubbish too. And I think they said the same thing here in Europe and in the US. No, it's all to do with the central bank and the governments through their monetary policy and their fiscal policy. What do I think is going to happen to real inflation of the currency? Well, it's going to pick up again because economies are slowing down and they need to keep the economy going. And the only way to do it in our current fiat currency debt-based system is to cut rates and maybe even do more QE. So there you go. Yes, watch these numbers come out and see how the market reacts. But it shows nothing about inflation, really. It's not really inflation. It's the consequence of inflation. So with that, I'm going to stop here and let's have a look where the markets are this morning. It's 8:22 a.m. London time. So we've got spot gold at 22,438, up $7. The high's been just under 24.40. Low has been 24.23. Silver is at 27.73, up 28 cents or 1%. So silver is doing pretty well. High's been 81, the low 20. The Dow futures is unchanged. NASDAQ 100 futures is unchanged. And so is the S&P. By the time you listen to this video, though, it might be a lot lower or higher. But don't forget, it's 8:22 London time. What about the currencies? Well, they're pretty steady. They're pretty much unchanged. The dollar is up a little bit versus the yen, up 0.4%, at 147.18. What about crude oil? That's up 0.2%, 76.50. Brent crude is up 0.5%, just below 80. And we'll finish off with the U.S. Treasury market. The 2-year yield is up 2 basis points at 4.07. The 10-year is at 3.96, up also 2 basis points. The curve is still inverted here, by about 11 basis points. I think it got really close late last week to around 4 or 5 basis points. Why is that important? Well, we've been inverted, or the 10-year yield has been lower than the 2-year yield for, I think, about 2 years now, which is a really long time. And historically, when it disinverts, when it gets back to zero and positive, the yield curve, it points to a recession in the next few months. So that's why it's important to keep an eye on this. I personally think we've been in a recession, or if not worse, since 2008. And the reason why the GDP data look positive is mostly because of all the deficit spending, because government spending is added on to GDP. So there you go. With that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day and a very good start to the week. Take care. Bye.